Hello, welcome to The Route to Success, where we spotlight leaders turning hardship into impact. Today's guest is Oscar Ortiz, co founder of Sebastian Strong, a foundation born from his family's journey with pediatric cancer and dedicated to accelerating research and walking alongside families in the fight. Since launch, Sebastian Strong has helped drive millions in research impact and built a Navigator program that connects parents to real resources when they need them most. We'll explore how love becomes action, how communities rally, and what hopeful progress looks like when measured in life's touch. Oscar, thank you so much for being here today and being willing to share such a personal story.
Thank you for having me, Sarah, and for the opportunity to share.
All right. So, what moment crystallized we have to do something, and how did that shape Sebastian Strong's first year?
Um, there were so many moments through the journey, and while you're going through it, it's really about caring for Sebastian and trying to find the best outcome. Um, Unfortunately, through the 14 months, after those 14 months, we lost him. Um, and you're picking up things throughout, and it was after losing him, you come to recognize all of the gaps that exist in the childhood cancer space. His only treatment option was over 40 years old. These medicines that they use are old. They're primarily developed for adults. So you just realize this isn't right. When you look at all the advances we've seen in society, in medicine, but beyond that, like we were talking to each other via an internet connection,
Yeah.
from different parts of the world. You look at all the things we've been able to do, and then in medicine, you look at what breast cancer survival rates, or prostate cancer survival rates were 40, 50 years ago, and that has changed dramatically, and it's because we've invested in it. So that was the moment for me of saying, this is a function of resources. I know it's more difficult to study because there are smaller population sizes, but what I also know is that when we as a society put together the innovation and provide the resources, or we can accomplish almost anything. I truly believe it. And we've seen it in other cancers, so why not for kids? And that was kind of the moment. The average age of diagnosis for adults is 66. For a kid, it's 10. Why aren't we investing more in providing 70 years of life for a child, just to get up to average life expectancy, and not 15 for an adult? So and instead of taking the traditional trickle down approach, which is we see what works for adults, and if it works for adults, we'll try it on kids. How about we take an approach where we no longer look at 5 years as the goal? Because 5 years, look, I'd give an arm to have another day with my son, but getting to 5 years isn't really the goal when you're a 10-year-old. Like when you're 70 and you get another 5 years, that's fantastic. But we've got to do more for kids. So that was really the moment of, why aren't we doing better for kids? And the public doesn't know it. And as an educated person, I had no idea. That's probably the biggest challenge.
It always makes me remember when I first started working with nonprofits, what it was told to me so often is, you don't know what you don't know. And there is such a gap in so many areas. And I know in the world of medicine, there are still amazing gaps, and we are still using treatment systems, like you said, that are 40, 50, 60 years old, which shocks me, truly shocks me. But I have to admit, I'm absolutely floored to find out that there has been so little research done with children. I mean, you would think that would be where the research dollars would go, right? Because children are tomorrow.
But there's no money in it, Sarah, and that's the challenge. And I understand that pharma is a business and they need to make money, and I understand that. But I also believe there's a moral obligation to.
Yes.
Call me crazy, but I think
No.
healthcare is something unique, and I've always believed philosophically, look, if people work harder, you can have the nicer things. Like I don't, we're not all entitled to the same things. I don't subscribe to that, but I do believe as humans we should all be entitled to more than adequate healthcare. And we don't live in that world because, unfortunately, it's highly profit driven. And if that's the case, and I say it this way because I worked in finance and accounting for many years in my prior life. I didn't always have the big beard and a bunch of tattoos. Life changed. But I always share with people, look, in business, if you're producing widgets, you produce thousands of widgets. Okay, if you have an error rate of 0.5%, whatever the number might be in widgets, that can be discounted as immaterial. For children, for humans, there is no immateriality. Every human is material to someone else. Nobody is unimportant. So you cannot discount with saying, you know what, we'll save the majority of, of adults. And look, it's moved from, now it's 1 in 5 kids that don't make it, 1 in 5, 1 in 6. We've made progress over the past years, but it's still not enough. And we've made progress in a few particular areas. There's so many other of the ultra rare cancers that have been left behind where you really have no options. So, I get the need to make money, but there needs to be a higher moral obligation to helping these kids.
So let me say the radical statement here. I've always felt that in healthcare, it shouldn't be about profit. It should be about health.
I don't feel like that's radical. I feel, in any business, you have a mission. What's your core? What do you do? And for me, for the industry of medicine, the primary goal should be the best patient outcomes possible. Point blank. No,
okay.
But this. How do we provide the best patient outcome? And according to what the patient wants to, because it's not just extending life. There's a lot of variables here. But
right.
what does the patient want and what's realistic? There's certain things that can't be done. But money has to be a secondary factor. And that's not how we operate. That is not how we operate. It unfortunately plays too big of a role in this. And hopefully there'll be movement to make progress here, because there's real opportunity and real need.
I 110% agree with you very strongly. And I am hopeful for change. I truly am, because I know that I always say, once we get past our ego and we just look at how we can help each other, that's when we'll really start catching that momentum, right? That's when we'll really start moving humanity forward.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this helps everybody. And this is the other part.
Oh, it does.
This is not, we often think of, when we have resources or we have more knowledge, whatever it might be, that we certainly mitigate certain risks by that. But this perception of, if I have money or if I have these things, I can protect you can insulate yourself from certain things. But you know what? Childhood cancer is a great equalizer, because with adults, very often it's behavioral, it's environmental. There are things that we've done to ourselves. If we weren't, we weren't healthy, we own some of it as adults. With kids, it's not what you did or didn't do. Sebastian was the healthiest of my 3 boys. Like he liked spinach as a snack, spinach salad. He was a strange bird. He ran like he was a cross country runner. That was his world. He's the healthiest by far of my 3 boys in terms of what he ate and how he exercised. So the reality is, all of this benefits all of humanity, because no one ever wants to be in this situation. And I quickly remind people, even at the adult level, when people ask me, I get this question all the time. You don't think there's an answer out there? I'm like, Steve Jobs died of cancer. Steve Jobs had all the money that one would need to find an answer. And the other one I use, and it's not to be political, is because I get the answer, you don't think the government has it? I'm like, first off, I don't believe the government can coordinate any sort of a cover-up of any sort. I don't believe there's that level of competency to pull something off. And when Joe Biden's son, his pride and joy, Bo, was diagnosed with brain cancer, that somehow the government has a secret answer, and arguably the second most powerful position in the world, the vice president, is we got to keep this secret. It's silly. It's incredibly complex, and we need to adequately provide the resources to move it forward. And I believe we can.
I agree. So something I'd really like to spend just a few minutes really talking about here, because especially in the current climate, I hear so often, what can I do? What can I do? And people stay focused on the large things. And I think you might agree with me that a lot of times it's the local, smaller things you can do. So you've catalyzed significant research funding with a very small team. What 2 operating practices most increase dollars to impact, and how can small nonprofits emulate them? What advice can you give to show that local movement and change does create that strong wave?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I'm going to back up a little to say I spent a career in corporate sales, in corporate America. So I didn't ever plan to run a foundation, but those skills and those networks were incredibly powerful, because very often, particularly in the pediatric cancer world, many of these foundations are born of tragedy. There's an element that it's a personal tribute to your child, and we have people with many different skills entering this world. So my prior career has helped me tremendously because ultimately you need to sell, you need to raise money,
Right.
and there's no way to sugarcoat that. You've got to go out and be there. And I think we run extremely lean. Is working with people that complements that. I am not the ops guy. I'm not the detail person. You know, I I can play with it, but long term, that's not the answer. So, you know, when there's two of us now, we're expanding with the Navigator program, but in terms of operational, it's myself and one other person, and she complements me, and I compliment her. She's not a salesperson. So I think it's making sure, because there's a lot of bases to cover when you're a small organization, and many foundations are small. You don't have, when there's an IT problem in my corporate life, you used to call someone in IT. When you needed something from marketing, you're like, oh, let me, like, you're looking in the mirror all the time. Like,
Right.
how do we do this? Like, you know, it's all right. Let's Google, let's chat GPT, let's figure this out. Let's work with
Right.
other, you know, foundations. So I wanted to preface that because it's easy to say, you know, I'm very proud of the fact that two of us, and last year we raised 1.5 million dollars. That's really, and without a giant donation. This is all very grassroots. But I always preface with people like I spent a career doing this, so it really prepped me for that. And I think the other part is developing authentic messaging. What do you do? And you know, how do you convey that? And to add to that, what gaps are you filling? What needs? You know, because there are so many great causes and so many needs out there. You need to be able to convey, for me anyways, clearly what you do and why you do it, why the need is there. And then the transition is to let people know how they can help. And you can help, you know, time, talent, and treasure. Obviously, money's always part of it. And because we run businesses, I get people all the time, well, you run a nonprofit. I'm like, yeah, it's still a business.
It is.
It's the nonprofit part just has to do with where the money goes in the back end. If we have a great year, I don't get dividends. I don't pay myself off, you know,
Right.
which is okay. This is what I signed up for. But you still operate like a business. I'm trying to drive revenue, be efficient on the expense side. So I think it's clarity, very, very important to be clear in what you do, because there's a lot of overlap in what people do. So how do you do things differently? And I say that particularly in the childhood cancer space, because as I said earlier, this is done in this space very often starts with honoring your child, that you need to do something. That's what the origin of this. And then look, the needs are there because of all the things I explained earlier. We just don't have the money. But that's where it starts now. Where do you fill in? Where do you fit in? Where do you provide a service? Where do you fill a need that isn't there now? And I think that's really important, because otherwise, and particularly in this space, you know, the first year we raised money, I think we raised $300,000. And that was, and I say it, a lot of pity money. You know, people felt bad. I don't mean it. And they don't know what to do. So I want to support. And we really didn't have like, all right, I'm going to do research, but we're building this out. You're changing the tires, the car's going 80 miles an hour. It took us time to figure out, okay, now what are we going to do? And start to really tie this in and say, okay, how are we going to be different? What needs are we going to meet? And start to make sure that your audience, your supporters understand what it is you do and how it's different from the next person. To me, that's critical. Otherwise, you end up in a tribute, and people eventually move on. I don't mean that in a bad way. They feel bad about your loss, but like any loss, obviously losing a child is unique and really, really difficult. But life goes on and people go on. So if you don't have a connection to what you do and why you do it, and get people connected to that, it's really hard. So that's critical for me.
If you don't mind, I'm going to summarize what you just said, because you gave so many great tidbits, and I'm just going to throw a little bit in from my experience. No, don't apologize. Please don't apologize. You were perfect. This was amazing what you said. So basically, what Oscar said is sphere of influence. And this is something that I talk about all the time. And the way that you get the largest sphere of influence is by getting a diverse board and strategically seeking the board members who have connections similar to what Oscar had, who are willing to use those. So if you are an executive director of a nonprofit and you aren't as well connected as you like, look to your board, enlist your board, because the duty of the board is to raise the funds. And so work with your board. Also having that clear messaging. And I say it a little bit different than Oscar. I always say, what problem are you serving? Oscar said, what gap are you filling? Same exact thing. But make sure that you can say that, and make sure you show what you're doing is different and how it's different. And have those messages down to, I don't know, Oscar, what would you say? 30 seconds and 3 minutes, very quick elevator pitches.
Yep. Yep. They've got to be, you've got to be able to convey it quickly, the elevator pitch.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm wordy, so it's hard for me to get it there, but yeah, it is that. And to add to your board comment, I think something else that's really important is be transparent in what you expect of your board, and let them know, because again, going back to this space uniquely, but foundations that are born of personal loss.
Mm-hmm.
My first board was people that couldn't say no. This wasn't like you're asking them, my child just passed, you're going to help me,
right,
whether you were the right answer or not. And then what I recognized, there was a lot of overlap. There was a lot of people with the same circles, and you know, they couldn't say no. Were they the right fit? Some were great, some probably not as well. So I think it's setting those expectations of what I need from you, and be very clear. I need everyone. It's time, talent, and treasure. You know, I want you to have all. Some people have more resources or access to more resources. That's fine, but there's got to be a balance. If you're not the big money, you know, person, particularly in small foundations, then you need to have a board that's willing to work too. Like someone that chairs people that chair our medical advisory board, which is how we decide where the money goes and interacts with all the doctors and the research institutions. That is a job. She, you know, like they've worked it, and they work it hard. She raises money too. She's fantastic. She's won a triple threat. But I think that's a really important part in setting those expectations for the board.
And let me also say, what I tell people when they're starting out is your founding board will be different than the board that carries you through, because that founding board is the board that is there to help you build those foundations, build that foundational doc. The people who are there because they can't say no and have the heart to give you that momentum. So don't be afraid to move them to an advisory position, right? And bring in the board members that fill those holes. So lots of nuggets here. And Oscar, what fascinates me, and I would love to just talk to you more about this, is you come from a business background. I come from a nonprofit background. And it's interesting how our beliefs overlap. How I've always said a nonprofit has to be run like a business. It has to be tight, and you can't take the pity, right? You've got to say, this is what we're doing and this is how we're making things better. And I love that you are running this so tight and clean. Your example is perfect.
Thank you. Thank you.
So let's talk about this. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Well, it's life, right? And unfortunately, you're in this position. But I would say that you have bravely made the best out of a terrible situation, and now you're impacting the future positively.
It's been a lifesaver. I will tell you that, and I say that without exaggerating. I don't know where I'd be if I wasn't doing this. I loved my wife and my other two boys. I needed a greater purpose. And this has been a salvation. I work harder than I ever have, but the impact that I'm able to have is so fulfilling. So yeah, I hate why I do what I do. I am grateful that I found a place to channel the energy.
I will say I understand you, because I cared for my grandfather for 12 years while he was sick and developed Alzheimer's and died of the disease. And when he passed, I struggled with grief and purpose. Like you said, it was just a really hard time. And so I started volunteering with the Alzheimer's Association. And so for 5 years, I volunteered every way I could. I taught every class. I helped people in difficult situations. I got information out, and it gave me that greater purpose that helped me heal and move on to my journey. And so I understand very much where you are, and I admire you for what you do.
Thank you.
So let's talk.
One last comment.
Yes.
If the world figures out that helping other people feels good, Like if you just figure out it's
Yes.
not about you and the value you get, and I know that sounds cliche and it sounds Pollyannish, it is the absolute truth. Helping others is so gratifying. And look, everyone needs to make money. I'm not saying you can give up everything and live on, but I make a fraction of what I used to make. The level of satisfaction I have from the work I do is it's not comparable. Like what I do now is truly important. And especially as you get a little older, you know, getting closer to the end, whatever that is, it's important to make sure you can look back and say, I left this place a better than when I found it. Yeah.
Oscar, we're so similar because since I guess I was in my mid-20s, whenever I've had a rough day, a bad moment, whenever I've wanted to feel sorry for myself, I've gone out and found somebody that I could help. Maybe it was just a kind word, maybe it was holding a door open, something. But when you help people, like you said, it is so gratifying and rewarding, and it gives meaning to those dark moments. It truly does. And I think you just hit on the key to fixing so many things. We just figured out that a little bit of kindness and a little bit of help produced hundreds of thousands of miles, right? I don't know how to say it better. We would all be in a better place.
Yep. Yeah. There's hope.
So I want to hear about this Navigator program because I've never worked in the cancer space, but I've worked in other spaces where families need resources, and it's always so hard to find those. So when I was reading about your Navigator and learning more about it, I would love for you to explain how that works and how families can access it and what gaps it fills.
Okay. As it was born of what we needed with Sebastian was research. That's the only thing we needed. And you don't recognize when you're in it because my only focus was him. But as horrible as our outcome was, I'm one of the lucky ones who loses a child. And what I mean by that is we had an NCI treatment facility 15 minutes from our home. I had all my family around to help with our other two boys. I had a job that had good insurance and gave me flexibility. And we had the income so that my wife could stop working and focus on Sebastian full time. Those are really big things because through the years, you know, despite our primary focus will continue to be research because it is where we change the future and create those better tomorrows. But we recognize there's huge gaps in today. And when I start to meet families and recognize, well, not everybody has the flexibility of a job. You have many families that don't have two caregivers. They have to travel long distances for care. These are all not just logistically overwhelming, but they're financially overwhelming. Those are things that I didn't have to think about. So just continuing to we talked about earlier, seeing gaps in the system. The people that work in this space as social workers or child life specialists, they do an amazing job with the patients when they're there and they help. But these people are incredibly overworked. They do not have the resources. So you start to recognize people slip through the cracks. So the idea of this was, and even as an educated person, you were lost. When you were told your child has cancer, you go into a fog. It is entering, I've never been in war, but I would imagine it's got to be something similar where you're just in a fog, where all of a sudden you've been told as soon as your child may die. It's just unimaginable. So your ability to process information, even as an educated person, like I would read things and I would read them 3-4 times. I just couldn't absorb. There's 3 components to this. So one is a nurse navigator who's going to, when you have those complex questions, you know, call somebody. You're out of the hospital because the reality is when your child is sick and anything comes up, you end up going to the ER. Just go to the ER. And sometimes it's for something small, but either way, you can't take a chance because their immune system's compromised. They need to go. So it's helping someone kind of navigate the medical side. We don't dispel medical advice. We do not go against what the primary, but it's having a hand to hold through that journey. We also have a social worker. Very often, you know, they help out with the financial and psychosocial side of things. Like I said, the financial devastation here is overwhelming. And to give you an example, this is a recent example of real life of something that happened, and we were able to help a young family who's unfortunately going through cancer for the second time. Their child relapsed, unfortunately. And with the timing of this, mom and dad were both mom with the child, dad all of a sudden out of work. So they start to go back to many of the wonderful foundations that helped them the first time around. But unfortunately, foundations a lot of times have limits on annual, how often they can support or how much money there is per family. So they had tapped out a lot of their resources. Through our Navigator program, we were able to find a resource outside of their geography, well outside of it, who stepped in and picked up 2 months' rent. And thankfully, number one, that child now is responding well to treatment, and dad has found employment. So that I know it sounds small, but so huge. From if you miss that moment, someone can be unhoused in a second, and unhoused with a sick child it's unimaginable. So we had a moment like that. I had another moment from the nursing side where I get the calls all the time when someone's diagnosed. Hey, you need to talk to Oscar. By no means am I an oncologist, but I developed a lot of relationships in this space. This young man had had surgery. They check out the tumor. When they get the pathology reports, that comes back as a very rare cancer. But they tell them you need to wait 6 weeks to do your. And they were not in a large MSA. There was not an NCI center near them, one of these National Cancer Institute centers. So they tell them it's going to be 6 weeks to get your PET scan, and then we'll figure out. Because they figured out that wasn't even the primary tumor. There's a primary tumor elsewhere. So I get put in contact with them. I explain, you cannot wait 6 weeks. I'm not a doctor, but I know that much. And this is on a Tuesday. And so I said, look, I'm going to reach out to a couple of places that I know. And by Friday, he was having his PET scans and putting together a plan. So in 3 days, dad sent me a text last week saying, you may have saved my son's life. Now, first off, I didn't do anything. I helped people. The doctors are the ones doing the work.
Right.
But it is that stuff, because even as educated people, you don't know how to navigate this. And then we have a patient, the third leg of the stool is the patient advocate who helps you. There was an insurance rejection the other day for an experimental drug for someone that needs to go to another. They have a trial in this particular place, and insurance was dragging their feet. And the doctors locally were saying, if you don't get, if by X states you're not in this trial, you've got to go with the traditional chemotherapy treatment that's available to you. Now, if they start that, then they're excluded from the trial. So insurance is dragging their feet, and our patient advocate went after it and said, this is not acceptable. And sure enough, got approval, and this family's going to that clinical trial site. So those are just some examples of what it is. And it's really the hand-holding, Sarah. It's the personal hand-holding to get people through one of the most difficult human experiences that exist.
I think something you haven't touched on here that I'd like to highlight is the emotional impact, and how when you're so overwhelmed by, I say big emotions, everybody calls them something different, but by big emotions, it's very hard to get a clear perspective and clarity. And sometimes you can't even put that one foot in front of the other. And so with your Navigator program, what I see in my brain is you're a hand and a light, right? Because you allow parents to be messy. You allow parents to be emotional. Their anger, their big feelings don't offend you in the slightest. You're able to weed through that. And as the third party, you can help them navigate the system with little to no emotion. And that is so undervalued and so vital to this process.
100%. And I think there's a credibility that comes because our patient advocate is also a childhood cancer mom. We've walked in your shoes.
Right.
It's not the
Right.
hypothetical or the cliche of, I know it, I can imagine what you're going. No, I've walked in your shoes, so we know it. And you're right. It's the handholding. It's we are on your team, and we're on your team for as much as you need us. And then beyond that, people always think of the survivorship part, and that, I mean, when you're in treatment, and that's where people think, all right, it's active. But when you move into survivorship, you're not seen as often. Your needs are still there. And then when you go a step further into bereavement, the resources really disappear because your child is the patient. That's the billing mechanism. You pass away. What support is there for you? So it's connecting people with those things too, because that impact is it's beyond the child. It's the entire family. It's the parents, caregivers, siblings,
Right.
are all impacted by this. So it's across the board, a hand to hold during this really difficult journey.
Yeah. So let's move to I'm a very practical person. So let's move to something a little practical. If someone has 10 minutes, $100, or a professional skill, what is the single highest leverage way to help children facing cancer today?
For me, I always will take time because it's awareness. Awareness is the biggest challenge. With awareness comes the money and the other things. The biggest challenge that childhood cancer faces is a lack of awareness. And as an educated person, I had no idea. So the vast
Right.
majority of the public, I've got a stump speech that I give people in terms of the three legs of the stool that support childhood cancer and why it's the government, it's pharma, it's foundations, and why these gaps exist. So it's explaining to people that these treatments are antiquated. They're using 50-year-old medicines on kids, and they come with dramatic side effects. It's not a common known fact, but in the childhood cancer space, 95% of childhood cancer survivors have some sort of serious health issue by the time they're 45 years old. And that is because of the toxicity of the treatments. And because if they live long enough, you know what? Chemotherapy and radiation do bad things to you.
Yeah.
So for me, Sarah, it is all about awareness. If I can get someone's time, because what I always say to people is once I share one of these things, I said, you can not unknow what I just shared. Now you have to choose to act or not. But the ball's in your court. And the other big thing about this cause, which, I know I'm not going to say it's easy because it's not, it is non-controversial. Unfortunately, we are in such a polarized world where there are so many wonderful causes that have to be so careful about what they say because they may want to upset one group or another. And look, most of them are doing wonderful work. Childhood cancer doesn't have that. It is simple. It's we're helping the most vulnerable, our kids, who are going into these circumstances ill-equipped because we have failed them. We have failed. I firmly believe as a society we have failed kids in the childhood cancer space. We're making progress, but overall we are well behind. We should be at a minimum where adults are. At a minimum, I believe we should have better answers. So for me, it's awareness because once you share that with somebody, now, like I said, the ball's in your court. You act or don't act, and then as a foundation, you gotta bring people in and let them know how and the impact of their help and how that can be, and that can happen in a million different ways.
So I have a little bit of a crazy idea that I would like to challenge the audience with. If you are a social media person, I am not, but if you are a social media person, and I apologize to you, Oscar, that I'm not a social media person. I left for mental health reasons.
I'm not either.
But if you're a social media person, I would challenge you to go to the website for Sebastian Strong, share the website, make it a habit once a month, once every 2 months, share the website. Because social media, when used properly, is a great avenue to build awareness and education and to help people know what is out there. Learn about the Navigator program so that if you can share it with your PTAs and your PTOs. You'd be shocked where just these places fit in. Share it with a school nurse, with a WIC nurse. Share about this Navigator in your community with the people that you know. Maybe you have a childhood checkup, right? And just say to your doctor, hey, did you know that this Navigator program exists? If you have somebody that's diagnosed with cancer, would you consider sharing this information? They can't divulge any information to you, but they can listen.
100%. Thank you for doing that because it is awareness, and as more people know that's how we bring about change. It's one step at a time. That's it. So
all right.
Thank you so much,
well,
Sarah.
Oscar, thank you so much for being here. If I can do anything or help any way, please don't ever hesitate to reach out. And while this was a very serious conversation, I want to thank you for it because I enjoyed it so much and I'm truly in awe of what you're doing. And please, truly, I mean it sincerely, if I can help, don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.